Hello, dear friends.
All right, we should be live. Welcome, everybody, to another roundtable discussion here on the Game Wisdom channel. For new people tuning in, I am Josh Placer, and we talk about game design and industry topics. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBlazer, and we have our Discord and Patreon link down below. Now, this is a very special roundtable, as normally we do them with a wide variety of topics. But this is going to be our first specific one aimed at a set genre, and it's going to be the adventure genre. And joining me, we have a panel of adventure game developers, so many it broke my standard UI. We didn't have the time to build a new one for our extended cast. But it is a pleasure to have everybody on, so I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of introduce themselves and the games they've made. So we will start with Corey and Lori, and then we'll work our way around our little room here.
Well, hi there. I'm Lori.
I'm Corey.
And
Corey and Lori Cole.
yeah,
That's who we are.
yes, and we have been doing adventure games for a long, long time now. Although technically, we've never done a straight adventure game, save one, which was Mixed Up Fairy Tales.
Mixed Up Fairy Tales. Mixed Up Fairy Tales was a educational adventure game.
Yes, but it was an adventure
game.
game.
Castle Dr. Brain was an educational adventure game.
But it was a puzzle game.
And a puzzle game.
So, yes, we've always done a mixture of genres with adventure and role-playing for our games.
So we're best known for the Quest for Glory series for Sierra Online, and most recently for Hero U Rogue Redemption. And I did a thing called Castle Dr. Brain, and we both did a game called Shannara, which was mostly adventure game with a little bit of role-playing.
Yes. So that's our history.
So if we ever do a straight adventure game, we'll be sure to let people know.
All right. Up, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Gilbert. I run Wadjet. I think you can kind of see my games on the wall over there. I have them all on the wall. Now I've messed this whole thing up, and I'm a moron. All right. Yeah, I'm mostly known for the Blackwell series. Recently did Unavowed last year. We have published a bunch of stuff. Geminiru, Primordia, Francisco. Oh, on my computer, he's this way. Francisco's Golden Wake and Shardlight. We've done Primordia, Technobabylon, Puzzlebots. I'm blanking on the rest, but we've done a lot of stuff. We've done about 15, 16 games altogether. And we've been doing this for almost 15 years. This is our 14th year. So we've got one more year to go. And then we're even 15.
Hi, I'm Francisco González. I have been making adventure games commercially for 6 years. The aforementioned The Golden Wake and Shardlight. My most recent release was Lamplight City. I'm currently working on a game called Rosewater. And I've been doing that. Hi.
I'm Julia Minamata, and I'm working on The Crimson Diamond, my first adventure game, and it's an EGA text parser mystery adventure game that's set in Canada in the early 1900s.
Hey, I'm Nathan Hamley from Sick Chicken Studios. I released my first commercial adventure game, Guard Duty, last year. It's just come out on consoles like PS4, Switch, Xbox. I'm currently working on another project, which is yet unannounced, but I'm hoping to release some information on that in a few weeks' time.
All right. It is great to have everybody on. For new people watching, we've spoken to everybody before other than Nathan, so this is your first time. We haven't had a chance to meet, so it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, pleasure to be on. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So for these roundtable casts, we open things up for the audience. We have a few set of prepared topics, but if you have any questions about the adventure game design, making an adventure game, anything along those lines, I saw Francisco tweet, "Don't ask if adventure games are dead." I'm sure somebody will bring that up. We'll see. Let us know in the
We'll have very
comments.
snarky answers if people ask.
No, it's the players of adventure games who are dead because we like to get off so often. The player characters, hopefully.
Oh, okay.
In terms of our time, we're going to aim for about an hour and a half, 2 hours being the absolute limit for this cast. I know everyone's going to probably throw like 5 hours worth of questions at us. But as I was telling the panel before, if there is interest and availability, we can always do a round 2 sometime in the future. So, I'm looking at the questions or some of the topics that we were looking at. I think this first one should be a fairly interesting one. This is one that Corey submitted about scope and scale. And he wrote, given a fixed number of puzzles and plot points in a game, is it better to have a compact game with high puzzle density or a larger one with puzzles more spread out? And I think this is always an interesting one about kind of the pacing of an adventure game. Because as I'm sure everyone here is well aware of, you always have that challenge of telling a story versus giving the player, something to do or, tasks to achieve.
I'll just jump in. I mean, my first answer when I get a question like that is, it better to do this or do this? It depends on the game, as with everything. I mean, if you want to have if you have a game that is more exploration based, where you walk around a world or a city or a place, then yeah, it makes more sense to have everything spread out to kind of give the player the time to explore and kind of see things at their own pace, because it's about exploration. That's not a fast-paced thing. You take your time to go through it. But if you want to have a puzzle fest and have nonstop puzzles one after the other, that's fine too. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do that, except I wouldn't put a lot of hard puzzles in a game that is very based on exploration or character base. If you have a character base that's about talking to people, you probably don't want to have a lot of puzzles, because that just gets in the way and is very frustrating. But if your game is about puzzles, then that's great. It really depends on the game. There's no right or wrong answer there.
So what you're basically saying is that the definition of adventure game is kind of in the eye of the adventure game developer. That
I always consider adventure games like a book or a movie. If people say, "What's the best way to make an adventure game?" I'm like, I don't know. What's the best way to write a book? What's the best way to write a movie?
There's no answer. Information there.
I would have said the same thing. My only point is it's also on the genre, because if you're trying to do a horror story or anything in that genre, you really want to create a mood in addition to the puzzles. Yeah. And the puzzles just break any mood that you're trying to go for. So it depends upon what you're trying to accomplish with the game, as well as the game you're making.
The most common complaint about my games is that they don't have a lot of puzzles, because I suck at them and I don't like them too much. So I don't have a lot of puzzles in my games. But that's not to say you shouldn't. I know we published a game called Resonance that had a ton of puzzles, and people loved that. But that's just not something I personally like to experience or write. Also, because I'm not very good at it, so I don't like making them.
I feel like Castle Dr. Brain, the game was about the puzzles, and so that's I made them very dense and have 3 significant puzzles in every room. I tried to play it the other day, and it was
with a name like Castle Brain, you expect that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe so.
I feel like this is in danger of going off on a tangent of just puzzles and what is like a puzzle. But like even just saying, when you think what is an adventure game puzzle, because like if you say to someone, you're going to get a different answer, because you have people who consider adventure game puzzles to be the classic Moon logic, use cheese on wand charger, whatever. And then you have other puzzles that are more logical and are easy and whatever. But yeah, it's definitely about the pacing, because if you're, like Laura said, in a horror game, for example, there's ways to do horror game puzzles. Like if you're running away from someone and you're locked in a room or something, and it's like, oh my god, I have to escape. There's ways to do puzzles like that don't just kill the pacing. You can still feel that tension. But as long as it's not like, oh well, now let me do this let me make some cookies to get my way out of this room or something, like then that's getting a little out there.
That'll be a delicious way of getting out of a room.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I have to agree with Lori about how the genre does inform the scope of what you're making, because the Crimson Diamond is a mystery, like a very classic cozy mystery type of game where the setting is it's a very small setting, and it's all set in basically in and around one house. A lot kind of like Murder on the Orient Express. Of course, that's a train, but it's the same idea where you're just in one set location for the most part. Even that new movie Knives Out, which is really cool. It's another movie that's very based around one setting. So I knew when I started my game, I was starting with that setting and basing a whole story with that being as a mystery convention, being restricted to that one setting. So I knew from the outset I wanted to keep that scope pretty small.
Yeah, I agree with Dave on this. I personally prefer easier puzzles. I enjoy the engagement that a puzzle gives in an adventure game. And sometimes it can give you a bit of a break from like the progression of the game. So rather than just constantly moving forward, uncovering new locations and dialogue, sometimes it's nice to be contained and sort of set up in a smaller environment with a puzzle that you need to overcome. But yeah, you mentioned horror games and puzzles. That is something that's really tricky to get right. I mean, I'm working on a horror game at the moment for my next project, and playing a lot of different horror games for influence. Some of the really awful ones that have turned up on Steam over the last few years. But I found that most of the time puzzles in sort of horror adventure games, because a lot of horror games are adventure games at heart, they normally give you a bit of a break from the tension. It's almost like a little bit of a relaxing time. You might have some really oppressive, dark music that feels really unnerving in the background, but you're not going to get attacked by anything. There's not going to be any jump scares. And so it's a similar thing, really. Sometimes puzzles can give you a break from everything else in the game, and then some games, they're sort of intertwined with it. But, I mean, Guard Duty had
something interesting. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
It's fine. Yeah, I didn't put too many puzzles in Guard Duty. I tried to spread them out a bit.
Because actually, my point, I was going to make a point about Guard Duty, which was that I thought it had quite a number of puzzles, especially at the beginning, and I have always found it very interesting that like more comedy, cartoony games seem to have more puzzles than the ones that are more serious or more dramatic. And I guess that since they do take you out of the story a little bit. If your game is kind of a little more heightened, a little more cartoony or funny, then you can forgive that kind of thing. Whether if it's a more serious, grounded story, it gets more annoying because it feels very out of place. But in a more comedy game, you can get away with that a little bit more. So I found Guard Duty to have a lot of puzzles, and it's interesting that you say you don't think there were.
Yeah, I think I put too many at the start in retrospect.
Okay, that'll agree. That'll agree.
Yeah, should have let the player kind of explore a bit more at the start. But yeah, I sort of, as I carried on making the game, I tried to thin them out a bit. But
yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting to what you just said there, Dave, about kind of like the serious/realistic games versus the more, cartoony, surrealistic in terms of trying to design a puzzle that fits into it. Because I'm pretty sure I've had this conversation with 4 of the 5 panels here, or 4 of the 5 windows, about kind of like that idea of an in-universe puzzle versus an out-of-universe puzzle. And if you're trying to make a very grounded, very realistic game, real life is not really set up, at least hopefully not as much, for crazy puzzle solutions, unless you just want to MacGyver your way through real life, which that could very well be a viable option for some people.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah. I played an adventure game recently that was really good. I'm not going to say the name because I'm going to talk a little bit of trash about one puzzle. But it had this one puzzle that if not for the one, it would have been great, cuz the setup of it was that you're trying to sneak into an office building and you'd have to disguise yourself, and I forget exactly what the mechanics are, but you basically have to make a mustache. It's kind of inspired by that one puzzle, but which
we all know.
Yeah, which shall remain nameless. But you have to, I forget what material you use. It's not cat hair, but you have to put a cup of coffee on a vent in order to melt it or evaporate it, so you have sugar to use as the sticky thing. And the funny, so like
the nasty stuff left behind in the cup after it dries out. I have one of those cups.
Which I don't know if that's how physics works, but whatever. But it's not so much the mechanics of the puzzle that took me out of it. It was the narrative framing around it, because the room is just a large room. There's a receptionist in one corner who isn't even looking down. She's looking straight ahead at you this whole time. And so you talk to her, and she's like, "Oh, you can't go up," or whatever. So then you come back, he puts the mustache on. It's just him with a fake mustache on. She's like, "Oh, okay." You get in the elevator, and the elevator doors are wide open, and he gets on the phone and he calls his assistant. He's like, "Hey, my disguise worked. I was able to get past the receptionist. She's in earshot." And then the best part is, after you do the whole subterfuge and he comes back down, there's a scene of him coming down and walking past the receptionist with the mustache off. So it's like,
that's just running it interference at that point.
That's known as a continuity error when it happens in a film, and they happen all the time. But I think what you're saying there is any puzzle can be turned into a good puzzle with good writing, and can be turned into a bad puzzle with bad writing.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a serious game. So
there's another game that also involves making a fake mustache that is not that game, where you would need to dress up as this woman's like deceased husband, and so part of the disguise, you got a mustache, and so it's like, and she's a little drunk or drugged or something, or she's very out of it at the moment. So you're trying to pretend to be her deceased husband, so she gives you information, and it was just a horrible plastic thing to do. It's just like the actual making of the mustache puzzle didn't bother me, but I'm like, this is horrible. I don't want to be doing this. I feel like a raging jerk. And so context also matters a lot. Like, why would your character in this world be doing this? And in more serious games anyway, the answer is usually no, they would not. So that's always the balancing act.
I do love how every adventure game designer has nightmares about mustaches now because of that one puzzle.
Oh, not me. Never. Except maybe Ken Williams' mustache.
Usually folks make that puzzle as a way to make fun of it while not really understanding that they are just doing the same thing. It's been 21 years since that puzzle, and people still use it as an example of bad puzzle design when they are. And
there have been other
many wonderful examples of bad design since then.
I wanted to actually wanted to break in and say real life puzzle, because you're saying these puzzles don't have any relation to reality. When I was 15 years old, 15 or 16, I was an exchange student in Berlin, Germany. And I wanted to, Jose Feliciano was doing a concert. I wanted to get into this concert. There were no tickets available. So I had a little dashboard placard that I don't even know why I was carrying around with me that said Times Chronicle Press from a newspaper in my hometown. So I went into the main convention center in Berlin with that, and they were having a show of, I don't know, something or other. It was just one of their exhibitions, and using that as my identification, and obviously being an American, I had no trouble getting a press credential for the exhibit hall, because they wanted reporters there. So I got my press credentials there, and I then went to the concert hall and presented the press credentials that I had for the exhibit hall, and they gave me a press pass to the show.
Nice.
So
we're still on the very first question, and we've been talking for 20 minutes. So.
Yeah,
it's because I didn't ask any other ones.
We could just talk about this for the next hour.
I think any one of these topics would be like a 2-3 hour discussion, especially with the panel here. And again, for the chat, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I will pull it up. And
adventure games are nothing other than exploration, puzzle solving, conversation, dialogue, and I don't know what else is there. So that's pretty much what an adventure game is. So if one of the topics takes 20 minutes, that's not surprising. We'll run out of space otherwise.
And I think Sean and Chow was just about to bring this up as well. In terms of like the story and writing an adventure game, as you just said, Corey, that the story of an adventure game is definitely one of the major draws for it. And I guess for the panel, how do you kind of sit down and prepare this kind of reminds me of the same issue when we talk about translating a game to a book or to a film, about trying to balance the quote unquote gamey elements with your actual story. Because I know that I've asked everyone except for Nathan here this question before about when you're sitting there coming up with your game, do you do story first or gameplay first? And I think most of you have said story first. So how do you sit down and say, I'm going to write the story, but I'm also going to put in various puzzles, various conversations, the more gamey side of things in the design?
I'll jump in because I take kind of a different approach. I generally create the world first, not the story, so to speak, but this kind of the environments and the atmosphere that I want to get across with the game, and then really struggle to piece it together with some sort of story. So it kind of worked for Guard Duty. I worked on that game for 4 and a bit years, so it took me a fair while to get that locked down story-wise. But yeah, I've sort of found that approach is actually working really well with my new project.
Well, setting always comes first.
Well, setting and characters, it's their combination. It's always a balancing act, but for me, it always comes from, I know where my character, the character. So we do need the background of where the character is, the context of the things, but the characters create their own puzzles because it's all about interacting with other characters in my games. And so therefore, each character has their own story to tell, and it's about unlocking stories that the characters are telling. And so that's how I go about it.
I often feel there are two different avenues to this, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot because I don't know if any of you saw my Adventure to X talk from last year. I was blocked for a very long time, and I was trying to figure out why. And there was I've realized that there are two aspects to there's two aspects to it. The plot and story are two different things. Plot are the things that happen. The story is why it matters. And there's this wonderful interview with Joss Whedon from back in the day when he was working on Buffy. He said the story of Buffy is that high school is hell. That's the story. The story is about getting through high school. That's what it's about. And all of the demons and vampires and stuff are just it's just the vehicle that we use to tell that story, which I found very interesting. There's the stuff that happens, and then there's what it's really about. And those often finding the what it's really about, why it matters, is usually is sometimes even more challenging than figuring out what actually does happen. And you have to work on both of those things, I think, to really make it engaging. And once you have that, it almost kind of writes itself because it's something you can fall back on. When you're stuck, you can remember, okay, what is this really about? What am I really trying to get at here? And usually having that foundation really can help you out of the weeds. And so that's what that's a recent epiphany of mine that I'm applying to my own work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been dealing with that question a lot, the whole balance of narrative versus gameplay. Because in coming up with scenarios, so the focus of the part I'm designing now in Rosewater focuses on little vignettes and specific companion excursions where you have little interact in an attempt to get to know your travel companions better. You have little character specific storylets that play out. So my writing partner and I have been going back and forth. She's like, okay, well, So this is showing this aspect of this character's personality, and like what Dave was saying, like the theme that you're going for. How does this relate to their arc and the theme that we're trying to explore? And like, okay, and she sets out this great story idea, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. I want to see that. But how can I play it? So then I have to sit down and think, all right, well then how do I take this great story or this great narrative and make it fun for the player to experience and actually do something? Because otherwise you're just sitting there watching it, or you could be reading it or whatever. But yeah, my general approach is that I'll come up with the story and the world and what was it we said? The plot. The plot is the overall thing, like the beats and everything. And then when I actually get into the writing of it and figuring it out, that's when the actual story and like the themes and all that stuff comes out.
I was talking about my current project with this narrative consultant. You interviewed her, Josh, Sally Beaumont.
Yeah.
And I figured she'd be a good person to talk to because we've already talked about it. I want her to voice the main character, and so I figured she would have a personal stake in it being good. So we talked about it, and I was telling her the plot and everything, and she said to me, I'm finding I have sympathy and engagement with everyone except the main character. And that was very interesting to me. I'm like, yeah, I haven't really thought about the main character aside from what she is able to do. And basically, it's a game about time traveler. She's a time traveler. And so I had her like, okay, I hate seeing bumbling idiots. So I'm like, she's very competent at her job. And something goes wrong. And she thinks, okay, this is what I need to do to fix it. I'm just going to do it. And I'm realizing, like, okay, yeah, she's competent, but she's not fun. She's not fun. So I'm like, well, maybe she isn't that competent. And when I started, or maybe not as competent, or she has something to prove or something. And the more I thought about it, and the more I could just go back and take the events that are already there and like have her react a little more frantically to what's happening rather than her just being, okay, this is what I have to do. It's, oh my God, what do I do? And I found that a lot more compelling and a lot more fun. So that sort of created that bridge to the character for me. I'm like, now I like her, and it's a lot more fun, and I'm enjoying writing it a lot more. So finding that connection is also something that's very important and sometimes very difficult.
What do I do aspect? Sorry.
No, I want to make sure you get a chance to talk because there's the thing about men stepping in the women in the room.
Oh, no, not at all. No, I was just thinking about what Dave was saying about the what do I do aspect of games. And that's another thing, because you have a whole story, you've got plot, you want the player to move through that, but you also have to kind of, in a way, tell them or show them what they should do to get there. And that's another aspect of storytelling that I find I'm really trying to improve as I'm testing my game and as I'm developing it. Because we have a story, and then, yeah, we need to get from point A to point B, but you need to kind of give the player all the stuff, the information, and to set up an expectation of what their goal should be to get to that next point. And I find that it's been challenging because sometimes, when you watch people play it, they'll get stuck and they don't know what to do next, and then they get bored immediately. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like a balance between, I want to have a story where people don't feel like they're being pushed or led around, but they feel like they are exploring and discovering for themselves at a decent pace where they feel like it's a natural progression of what they were doing before.
I think maybe the average player in the 70s, 80s, and 90s had a little more patience. Now if you get stuck, they've got a lot of other places they can go. But yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right that if your main character is not likable, you've lost. That's really the most important thing, is you've got to be able to identify with that character and want to be that character. As I say, in our games, Lori does about 90% of the writing. I really don't do much of it these days. But my take on making it into gameplay, going from writing to gameplay, is to say, where are the hooks in this story? Where are the joints and the parts where that NPC out there needs help with something, and that it might be time for the player character to be able to step in. And that, to me, is where the puzzles go, and that's really where the real story and plot interactions go, is that you find out where your character can be important, because in the long run, that's all it comes down to, is every game is in effect about the player saving the universe. whether it's making it through a semester at high school, or whether it's literally saving the planet. So you have to make the player important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like trying to write like the main character, I think that's always a very interesting challenge. I think it's kind of one of the topics I think Corey posted, but the idea that I know we've had this conversation before, the sociopathic main character who will do anything and everything to, achieve their goal, even if it means like ruining the lives of everyone around them just to like get a key or get into a place early. And I think going to what Dave was talking about with his next game, with trying to make the protagonist likable, is the idea that, do you make a character that, like, if you say your character is, super competent, the best there is at everything, why are they having trouble with, a simple puzzle? Or you have, like, the other, the complete opposite, and your character is, the complete bumbling fool who can't do anything unless you're the one who guides them. And it's hard, I feel, or I'm sure each of you have had this thought about, how do you, again, like that whole balance of narrative versus gameplay, how do you get this character to be able to fit into the story when the player is, in essence, that character, or the one who's... Yeah.
So don't do that.
Well, my approach is always from the standpoint, and so many of my protagonists are not so much characters in and of themselves, but avatars of the player. And so therefore, when I go about designing a game, for a lot of the games I've done in the past, I said, what does the player want to do? If the player wants to be a pathological liar who's going to cheat everybody around him, that's what they're thinking is fun. And so therefore,
why haven't we given more of that option in our games then?
Well, we've always given the option to be nasty, or to do something stupid. And generally, we reward the good things and being able to interact and having a good relationship with other characters. But like in Hero U, we gave you the chance to be a snarky character who cheated on everybody, and you could get through the entire game and effectively win the game and still have a nasty personality. But it was always because you had an option of whether to be snarky or whether to be really kind and lovable or whether to do this intelligently. And so we let the player guide the tone of the story in that way.
There was an interesting, I think it was Richard Cobbett, who was working on our current game, Nighthawks. He said something very interesting once when the Doctor Who games came out, like about a decade ago. I forget when exactly they came out, but he said something very interesting where he said, being the Doctor is incredibly boring. Being with the Doctor is a lot of fun. And I found like, yeah, that is kind of interesting. And it's like, yeah, if you're like most Sherlock Holmes games, being Sherlock maybe isn't all that exciting, but like being with Sherlock and like helping him is like kind of tagging along is a lot of fun. And I did that a lot with Unavowed. Like I always thought of like there's four characters in the game, but the character you play is very much a blank slate, and I really leaned into that. Like there's no voice acting for the main character, kind of. We won't get into that. I don't know if I'll played it, but anyway, there's no voice acting. There's no real set personality for the main character. It's just about hanging out with these other four people who I found them really interesting. Hanging out with them is fun. And then I tried writing another game where you played as the four characters, and I just didn't enjoy it as much. It just wasn't as fun. I found it more fun to watch them in action than to be them. And I think that's another thing as well. It's like trying to find the fun in this kind of thing is always the biggest challenge for me.
Let's see. A few comments came in from chat earlier. Sergio asked, for you, Dave, when you're talking about story and plot, what would be the story of Unavowed?
Okay, easy. It's these group of four kind of lost, slightly broken people coming together and forming a team. That's the story. It's watching these four people come together over the course of the game. That's the story.
Right.
And like for that to happen, they like fight demons and ghosts and dragons and jinns and stuff like that.
Let's see. Junk Mail.
Down to its essentials. That's what that is.
I think Junk Mail, he or they asked, when designing an adventure game, how much weight, if any, do you put into sideline slash procedurally generated quests slash content? Guess they're asking about
None.
John Engel posted something amazing today about that. Go look it up. He just said that, as soon as the illusion breaks, when you see the edges of like the procedurally generated stuff, it stops being engaging because you can just see, okay, that sky was randomized, these creatures were randomized, and like it just stops delighting you because there's no real surprises. You can just sort of you see behind the curtain. You really need a storyteller, someone in charge to kind of tell you a story and surprise you and delight you rather than it just all being random. I don't think that it can make good games. It doesn't necessarily make good stories.
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about as I've been working on my thoughts for my next book on roguelike design. This is definitely a tangent right here, but the idea of a randomly generated or procedurally generated story. It seems like it's one of those like very like buzzworthy buzz phrases that doesn't really go anywhere. Like the closest I've seen a game that I kind of get that would be Hades by Supergiant, where the whole world and the narrative is built on the fact that it is a procedurally generated gameplay, so everyone is okay with the fact that you can live, die, and so on. But I don't think I've played like a straight up roguelike that makes like the story is the focus. In the fact that, as from that comment there, like once you know where the edges are in the procedural generation, it just kind of falls apart in terms of trying to tell something cohesive.
Yeah, I don't think procedural generation has much of a place in adventure games. It's the wrong genre for it. Chris Crawford, a number of years ago, tried to create a thing he called the Storytron.
Yes.
That would generate stories within a fixed context, and he had basically the politics of Camelot and what was going on with Lancelot and Guinevere and so on. And he did some interesting things with it, but I don't think it really resulted in compelling stories. To me, the player is the real one telling the story, and that he's doing it in collaboration with the game writer. So ideally, what you have is many different lines of scripting and dialogue, and the player chooses where to go, how to explore, who to interact with, what to do, and based on that, the player creates a linear story from the vastly branchy story that we presented. So, could some of that be done procedurally? Maybe, but it's too easy to end up with storylines that just don't make sense.
Often I hear about stories of things that happened while people were playing a procedurally generated game rather than the story in the procedurally generated game. And those are very different things.
I wanted to go back because I had an answer, but I wanted to let it stew a little bit so it made sense in my mind. But with regard to the balance between the player character being a blank slate and having an actual character, I've always found that to be the trickiest because, yeah, like you do want it to be an avatar for the player, but then also depending on the type of game you're making and how much of a choice you have in events and how much of like straying into a role-playing game it becomes, that's kind of where you have to figure out, how much of you can put into the character. And I've very much been a proponent of being able to play the character how you want them, but also I've noticed that like just from reading stuff and seeing games in action, like when you do get the nasty option, a lot of times players like will see it, they'll chuckle, but they won't actually pick it. There was an article about how no one played Mass Effect as the bad guy, Renegade, was it? I don't know, I never played Mass Effect. Shocking. I know, it passed me by. Anyway, but yeah, like the option's there, and there's all this content for it, but no one did it because I think in reality, no one. Like I know I personally, when I play a game that gives you the option to be a jerk, I'll play it through the first time and be super nice and everything like I would normally play, and then I go back and I play the jerk run through just to see.
Back when I had free time, when I had
yeah, right, exactly. I can't
before Eve, as I call it.
I couldn't tell you the last time I actually had the luxury to do that.
Yeah.
I played the original Knights of the Republic like 2 or 3 times for that reason, and the dark side path is so much fun. It's a lot of fun. It's great.
But I think it's easy to like overscope yourself and think, yeah, I want to have the option to be really nice or really a jerk or whatever. But I think if you rein it in and you figure out your character and you think, okay, well, would my character be a jerk? If my character was not an angel, how bad would they be? Because like you don't want your character to be like, well, let's see, should I be nice to this person or should I murder their grandmother? Like, no, do something more in line, and then that I think leads to more natural feeling character progression.
I had a discussion with a voice actress once. She was in one of the audiobook versions of Hitchhiker's Guide. She played Random, this actress named Sam Bayard. And she would tell me that once in a while she would come across a line and she'd be like, well, I don't know why Random is saying this. And it's not, most of the time when an actress says that to me, we'll finagle the line and change it. But you can't change the work of Douglas Adams, right? You can't change the line. And so what she would do is like, okay, this line seems out of character. Let's try to think of why she would say this line. And often that's the case. Like you can never, the trick, especially with, dialogue choices in adventure games, like you have the jerk option. And the trick and the real challenge in that kind of situation is letting the player feel comfortable choosing the wrong answer, letting the player know that it doesn't matter what you choose, neither answer is wrong. You're not going to be punished for this. So feel free to have fun and choose what you want. And often you think, oh, one of these answers is wrong. Or, the game maybe tells you it doesn't matter, but it really matters. Like at the ending of the game, they said, you did this wrong, you're going to be punished now. Or something like that. And like I tried that with Unavowed. People were really scared. Like something happened in the last section where they're like, "Oh, I shouldn't have made that other decision earlier in the game." I was like, "No. You don't get locked out of anything. Just do whatever you want. It's fine." And so that's always the challenge is like making all those choices, having all those choices while enabling the player to feel comfortable choosing what they want. So that's also a challenge that I face a lot.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the storyline was, but there have been a couple things in our games that players said, I did that to try it out, but it just made me feel so guilty that I couldn't do it. And actually, the play testing in Hero You Rogue Redemption, people didn't get to a lot of the snarky paths, so they really didn't test them very well because they kind of felt queasy about doing them. Said, "Oh, I need to be a good guy." Well, we didn't make you be a good guy.
Yeah. Yes, but they couldn't hurt the feelings of the other character in the game. So it was that's effective though. If you feel like you're too invested in the character to play it wrong, and it's that's kind of the ideal situation.
At least it means you wrote the character right, that people care about them.
And I think like the funny thing, like talking about like morality choices and good and evil in these games, I think I'm the opposite. I always start with the evil path because I usually have a good idea what the quote unquote good path is going to be for these heroes. I remember the game Spider-Man I think it was Web of Shadows. It was one of those open world Spider-Man games that had a good evil path, and I just went 100% evil because I wanted to see how are you going to write evil Spider-Man. I just wanted to see the writers do that. Let's see. But I think there's a comment that was brought up. Oh, here it is. Sean D, when we're talking about endings, about one ending is enough for me. I think that's always like one of the more interesting aspects of adventure games, or even just player-focused narratives. Like, the Walking Dead was brought up in chat as well. This idea that while there are multiple paths in these games simply by how they're written, each person who plays it has their one, the one that they chose. Like, that's how they view the story. And I think that's how I typically play a lot of these adventure games, or at least the ones that allow for these multiple choices, that I just never felt the desire to replay it if I already made, my quote-unquote path from start to finish.
I think with
Well, I found that also, like when I did Unavowed, there are lots of multiple paths through the game.
Mm-hmm.
But my hope wasn't that you would replay it, although I hoped you would, because that would be cool. What I was really hoping for, and this is the great thing about branching storylines, where each branch is relatively satisfying, is that you get people talking about it for a very long time. Often when I see folks like doing Let's Plays, like if they chose like the actor origin, or and they got to like an area where they meet Vicky for the first time, and they're like, oh, like how would that have changed if you chose the cop origin instead? Would she have reacted differently? And then you get someone who played the cop origin be like, oh yeah, it was really cool, and they'd have a conversation about it, and like kind of would foster discussion and like continue the conversation about the game long after it launched. And that like was something I was really hoping for, and it seems to have been successful because people still have those conversations. So I'm very happy about that.
We get some FOMO, fear of missing out, from players, and it's like, well, I had the choice of, science or magic class or first aid, and what if I took the wrong one? I said, well, there is no wrong one, but you can go back and play it again if you want, and you'll get a different part of the story.
The problem games are such a time commitment that it's sometimes hard to do that.
Yeah, especially our games, which are most of our games are really long, and so yes, it is a time commitment, and you have to balance out pacing of story too, for how much time the player actually has to play it, and so that's another factor that you have to come into game design is how long can a player play this, and where are breakpoints the player can go off and do something else. Because if it's too sustained, too suspenseful, and you can't get anywhere, it makes too much of a time commitment.
Yeah, I've had that. I've shown up late to work a few times because I was up till 4 a.m. playing a game that I couldn't stop. So
I don't know.
You do want to have some natural breakpoints.
Let me see. And then
Nathan, Julia, say something.
What's that?
Say something.
Say something, you guys.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, actually, I was thinking while you guys were talking about the branching, I was thinking about a game I recently finished last month. It was called The Longing, and it has a couple different branching paths you can take. There's really only 2, but the game takes place over 400 days, and they're not necessarily 400 real-time days. You can make the clock pass by faster, but even when you do, it still might take you maybe 2 or 3 weeks to finish from start to end, just because the time does pass by so slowly. And I finished it once, and the developer actually recommends you only ever play it once. It's only designed to be played once. And I told myself, you know what? No, I'm going to finish this game and I can go back and I'm going to play it again. I haven't gotten around to it yet because of that barrier of how long it takes to play. It's such a different game when it comes to time scale and the expectation of player participation and involvement. You could actually start the game up and close it and wait 400 days.
Okay.
Hi, Janet.
Keep the light on. It just was a bit blinding. That's okay. I had the kitchen light off for this reason.
Right, I see. Yeah. It's just the time investment necessary to explore both paths for that game is I think intentionally very intimidating. So that's a way to do it, I guess, if you want to have only a couple branches or one branch, is make it so psychologically difficult to go back and replay the game just from a time standpoint.
It's psychologically difficult. That's great. To remember that.
I think going back to the Telltale games and like the branching choices in them, it almost ruins the illusion if you replay them, because the choices really don't have hardly any impact at all, like other than the next maybe 10 minutes of gameplay. But I played through all of the Walking Dead series alongside one of my friends. I was like really excited to tell them how my story went and what events happened in mine. And it's the same, and it's sad, really. I mean, Unavowed did it really well. I thought Dave did a great job of that. I mean, I haven't replayed it yet, but I've heard other people's playthroughs being different.
Well,
and,
the
like,
interesting thing,
different scenes.
I kind of took a little bit of a lesson from Telltale and how that was always a little disappointing. Like I said, I always based like the story of Unavowed was these characters. So the choices in Unavowed always centered around which characters do you bring with you, and often because it's based on the characters, a lot of things change depending on who you bring with you, and so that is often the fun of Unavowed, was seeing how things play out depending on who you bring with you. So that having that philosophy helped Unavowed, while it maybe didn't help Telltale because their foundation was something different. So it always depends on the game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of places, the whole point is the choices you give the player must be meaningful. They can't just be oh, you have a choice of 3 things to say, but it all converges back into the same thing. Because if you aren't making the player feel like what he's doing is important to the story, he's just, effectively reading a book that he has to actually do something in. And it's to really get player involvement, they have to feel like what they're doing is actually important to the game.
Yeah, more recently, especially in conversation, we used to use the Monkey Island approach. We could basically go through the menu and pick every single menu option and eventually get through every possible dialogue. And we've kind of gone away from that, trying to make conversations more natural feeling. So if you pick a branch in a conversation, that's the branch you're in. And there's no reason why the conversation would return to those other topics. If you're just asking for information, yeah, you can ask several questions. But
I mean, there's no reason why that can't work.
Yeah, you can do it both ways.
There's no right. Like I always say, there's no right or wrong answer. This isn't necessarily bad. Yeah. It's just a bit. It's an old-fashioned, it's an old school way of doing it, but it works. Yeah, it works.
Yeah, that whole breaking of illusion happened to me with LA Noire, because when I first played it and I wanted to get every single thing right, and then I went back and got every single thing wrong, and it didn't make a lick of difference. And that's what inspired me when I made Lamplight City, because I was like, I want to make a detective game where you actually have to pay attention, and if you click on every single dialogue option, you might get something wrong or you might do something else. So I wanted to make the player feel like they were having an effect on things.
It was really funny in LA Noire. You would do everything wrong and then mysteriously, like, oh, someone called in a disturbance at this address that you would have been at anyway, and so you just show up and the thing happens.
They go through great lengths to make sure that you can practically see the designers like popping out and like, no, go that way, push that way.
That's just the thing. If you're not if you're deliberately designing the game so you can skip the content if you want to, it's like, if you have these amazing scenes, you want the player to be able to see them. So it's like, why would you do that? Why would you design your game that way? Why would you want the player to skip stuff?
It's very funny you said that, because I had an epiphany myself the other day, because I was designing something and I was like, okay, I want to like, if you have this scene and you help this character, I want you to feel like you made a difference, and you see this character again. And I was like, oh, I have this great place where I can put this character later on in the game. And maybe if you help the character and you find this character there, they help you by letting you skip the puzzle to get past this thing. And I was like really in my head about, okay, yeah, but so then if you skip the puzzle, but then I was like, why would I want the player to skip a puzzle that I designed? Let me just do it so that you see the character and you have a rewarding narrative experience for seeing them, and you get like a fun little bit of extra content or something. But why would I want to skip a puzzle? And then I was like, why would I ever want to skip a puzzle? So I was like, if I'm going to make a puzzle, you better be damn sure you're going to let the player see it. So I was like, I got to get out of that design mindset.
There's this one scene in Unavowed that it sort of kills me, because you only have a 1 in 3 chance of seeing it. If you brought this one character, Mondani, with you to the Wall Street mission, she could potentially get drunk. And it's just a very, very funny scene, because she she had an Irish mother, so she starts talking Irish, and it's very funny. And like half the fan art of Mandana are the people who played that scene and draw her drunk, and it's very funny. But people who never played that scene, they're like, "Wait, what is this? Like, why did I miss this amazing thing?" I'm like, "Well, because like I just designed it that way." So.
I got
but you messed up your ESRB rating by having a character get drunk.
Let me see. We got a few comments in chat. I think this was a really interesting question. Where was it? Let me scroll up. I went past it. Chat is always. I always love when chat moves faster than I can follow. Here it is. Sergio asks, nowadays lots of adventure games are being released on Switch. Is it worth it commercially? And are adventure game studio games ready to be deployed on Switch easily? Is this something anyone has thought of here?
Nathan can answer this.
We launched Guard Duty on Switch last week. There's currently one porting house that can port adventure game studio games to Switch, who we went with. It seems to have done
it was
well so far. It was. Hey, Janet.
That's my wife.
Hey,
yeah. Did you hear that?
I didn't know.
Here.
Replayability, are they any good? I keep trying to talk to them and they don't want to talk to me, so are they worth trying to chase up, or
they keep blowing us off?
Yeah,
sorry,
I'd say
so,
yeah.
for listening to this.
I have nothing but good things to say about them. But
we here?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so
They haven't yet figured out that you're famous, Dave, and that your games are amazing bestsellers that they'd make a mint from boarding.
The game did a lot better on Switch than it did on Steam. I'll say that.
Oh, really?
I mean, the publisher helped support us with PR and marketing as well at the same time.
Right.
But we did that for the Steam launch.
So it's done better on Switch than on Steam.
It has. I won't say numbers, but in general, on the amount, because we released on PS4 and Xbox as well, and
really?
PSP.
How'd you manage PS4 and Xbox? That Ratalaika did all that.
Yeah, every console it's on now.
All right,
but,
can you put in a word for us? Because Janet, like she just said, sorry, this is completely going beyond the scope of this interview, this panel. But yeah, like put in a word for us because like they just blow us off, and it's annoying.
I'll let them know. Yeah, they've been great to me. So
the issue is that we wanted to have access to the source code in the end, and I don't think they like that. Anyway, we should stop talking about this because this is live and people aren't interested in this.
Adventure games work well on Switch. It's good.
Yeah, actually, there are companies that specialize in putting games. Like we're on Unity with Zero Rogue Redemption. There are companies that specialize in porting Unity games to Switch, which technically, theoretically, is you click a button in Unity and it's there. In practice, it's a lot of work on the user interface and different screen ratios and stuff like that. That does need some customization. So we are trying to get Hero U Road Redemption on Switch. But Ron Gilbert, who was the lead designer of Secret Monkey Island, has a Grumpy Gamers blog. And he had an article a year or two ago about, I guess it was last year, talking about his experience with putting his latest game, Thimbleweed Park, on the Switch. And he had absolutely amazing results. And Switch was by far his best income producer for the game.
Yeah, we've been really trying.
However, I had some conversations with him, and he cautioned me that based on the experience of several other developer friends of his, that may have been a narrow window that he hit shortly after release of Switch, and it said it was not clear that somebody coming out for Switch today would still do as well. But sounds like
you're doing pretty well, Nathan, right?
Yeah, it's done all right. It's done pretty good. Yep.
So
I think there was like a boom of stuff coming out on Switch and getting loads of visibility because there wasn't that many games on it, and that has. I mean, it's been 3 years since Switch came out.
Ported to consoles in general was amazing because then when the next generation comes out, like you'll have that ability. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's it's good.
I think There's an interesting question there about kind of bringing adventure games to the console and the handheld market, where, again, the adventure genre has been predominantly PC, pretty much, I think, like, right up to, like, around, like, Telltale began to, like, break down. We started to see, you know, The Walking Dead on PS4, Xbox Live, or whatever their service is, and what it means to kind of design these games for an audience who didn't grow up playing them, who have no idea what Monkey Island is, or have never heard of any of what a lot of people consider to be like the golden age of the genre.
So, what exactly is the question? Like, people haven't heard of the genre, and so, yeah, I'm not sure what the question is.
Like, trying to bring these games to a platform and design them in a way that, like, somebody who didn't grow up playing adventure games, who have no idea, like, what any of this stuff that we're talking about is, are playing them for the first time.
Well, it's interesting, and I don't mean to monopolize all this, but I always use this example of when we did beta testing for Emerald City Confidential, and this was almost a decade ago now. No, more than that. It was 2008. Jesus. Anyway, this was it was the first and only time we were published. And it was by PlayFirst, who was a casual developer, and they took this adventure game and they put it in front of like their Diner Dash and Chocolatier players, and they had no idea what to do. Like, they were trying to like you had the character on the screen, and it's a very simple puzzle: locked door, there's a crowbar on the floor. We all know how to solve this puzzle already, and so they would click on the crowbar. And, you know, she would reach down, pick up the crowbar, and then they'd be like, where'd the crowbar go? It would freak them out. They're like, where'd it go? I'm like, well, you know, check your inventory. You know, there was a little box at the bottom. And I found this is incredibly fascinating. Once they figured out they could click on the crowbar, they kept trying to use it on the player character. They would just keep giving it to the player character, and she'd be like, you know, and nothing would happen because you can't use anything on the player character. And then finally, we just had to, like, after the fifth tester, like, all the testers did this. We just had to ask. Normally, you don't want to ask questions, but they're like, "Why are you clicking the crowbar on the character?" And she said, "Well, I'm giving her the crowbar so she can open the door." Mm-hmm. And I found that just fascinating. It's totally logical, makes complete sense, but also at the same time, it's not what we intended. And how do you tutorialize someone who just really? How do you tutorialize this mechanic that seems like second nature? It's like breathing to all of us, but to someone who doesn't know it, I mean, it was hard. And honestly, we had to simplify it and like hold them by the hand so much that the game almost wasn't any fun anymore.
Well, Dave, it's like in an RPG, sword doesn't do you any good in the inventory. You've got to have that sword equipped to use it. So, you know, so it really does make sense from people that are used to that type of game. But yeah, I tried to convince, back in the 90s, I tried to convince Sierra to port the Castle Dr. Brain to consoles. I thought it was a no-brainer, natural thing that puzzle games would do really well on people playing on TVs and on consoles. And, you know, they were like, I don't know, we'll do other stuff. And, you know, Brain Age and stuff did really well after that on some of the handhelds. But, yeah, I think that certain types of these games, I think that a well-written adventure game that's story-oriented could go over very well on handhelds and
only if the people that play them see them.
Yeah,
because you find
that. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. There's a bit of a lag, so I totally.
It's the trick is getting seen. I mean, now that it was always the joy, the main goal that Sierra always had in the ancient days was to be mass marketed. That everybody would buy adventure games because everybody would play adventure games, which for a short time period in the distant past, it was true because that was the main game genre that was out there. And so therefore everybody played it, but that doesn't mean it appeals to all the players out there. And really the trick for adventure games on consoles and on Switch, and that is to make sure your audience can find you and recognize this is an adventure game, and this is the kind of game that you play if you like adventure games.
That's why iOS is kind of sadly dead for this kind of thing, at least for us. Like when we did our first iOS port in 2012. We ported Gemini Roo, or to be on. My wife did it. She's the techie. She ported Gemini Roo to iPhone and iPad, and it did phenomenally well. It was almost like relaunching the game again. It did really, really well in its first month. It sold like, I mean, it did really well. But then as we released more and more of them, and they're hard to port because there's a lot you have to redo everything so it works on a handheld screen because you're like touching everything, and a lot of these games rely on mouse over, which you can't do on a touchscreen. So, but the more and more of them we did, the less and less they sold, and we had to pray that Apple would feature them. And if they don't feature your game, you might as well not even have launched it. So it's like you could put in all this work only for them not to feature it, and you get nothing. And even when they did feature it, we only would earn a fraction of what we did 5 or 6 years ago, and it just stopped becoming worth it. So like from a cold capitalist perspective, I guess it's like what Ron Gilbert said. We hit that window, and now it's just like, it's just not worth it anymore. People keep asking when Unavowed is coming out for iPad. We're like, we're just not going to do it. It's just not worth it. We like, earning money, and we just can't do it.
I would love the answer about how to find a new generation of players, because pretty much the only people that bought into Hero U were people that like Quest for Glory. So people that have never heard of Quest for Glory, we have no way at all reaching them. We can't seem to find the lever to convince them that this is something that they'd enjoy. I don't know whether they would or not, but we don't know because they don't play it.
Yeah, that's
curious to know. It always depends on the subject matter. Like I always feel like, okay, not everyone's going to like every story. So not everyone is going to like every adventure game. It used to be like, I remember in the early 2000s, there was this feeling of, when someone would release an adventure game, it was like an event. And it's like, I released an adventure game, love me. And now there's a lot of them coming out. A lot of people are making them. So it's no longer the event that it was. It's about, do you like this kind of story? Here's this kind of setting. Here's this kind of character. Does it remind you of anything cool that you like? Maybe you'll like this. Like when I did Unavowed, it was like, I love Dresden Files. Do you like Dresden Files? Maybe you'll like this game. I was inspired by Dresden Files. So that's how I approach everything. It's like, I love this thing. I'm going to make something inspired by that thing. Maybe you'll like it too.
I'm curious if there's any modern adventure developers who didn't grow up playing adventure games, because I feel like, it's second nature to all of us who grew up playing adventure games. Oh, sorry, excellent. Getting out of that mindset of like everyone should know what these icons do and whatever. It's interesting. Also, represent ports to other systems.
Wow. I've always found that though, like whenever I show the Sierra interface to someone, even like
it makes no sense.
That makes no sense. It seems second nature to me, but like I see the Sierra interface, most folks are like, "What the heck is this?"
Yeah,
all these icons that you have to move the mouse up to the top of the screen, and it just confuses everyone. So I always tell people, don't use that.
What's that?
Oh, I was saying even I get confused. The later Sierra games, right-click changes your mouse icon, and I hate that. Trying to click around to say I want to walk somewhere, so I got to get the walking icon. Blah, hate it.
when I first showed the Crimson Diamond at a show in 2018, the default walking option was that Sierra tap to move. So you press the arrow key once and the character would start moving, and you press the arrow key again and the character would stop moving. And I didn't even think about how no one has played a game like that in 30 years.
That's
and so when I showed it, people
about that too. I remember I played the game and I'm like, I'm expecting it to play like Laura Bow.
Exactly.
And you're like, no one understands that.
No one understood
I'm just as guilty of that wide-eyed nostalgia as anybody.
Yeah, so that was super educational.
And when I played it, I was like, why is there a pause before she comes up and down the stairs? And you're like, oh, that's because of people holding down the key don't know. So I was like,
I complained about that. So that was my fault.
Dave gave me that feedback. So now, Francisco, what happens is if you do have the Sierra style walking, it won't do that pause. But if you do have press to walk, now it will have that pause. So I did change it. Yeah, so you guys helped me make the game better. But it it was super educational because you get in that mindset of, okay, well, everyone knows how this goes, but no, everyone doesn't know. That was 30 years ago. So the default now is just keeping that arrow key pressed. And then
no, it wasn't, Julia. It was last.
Oh my goodness! I also made a tutorial room in the game after I showed it that first time. That actually just takes you step by step exactly how to play the game, the movement and the inventory and the notebook, and ask about this and talk to whoever. Because I couldn't take it for granted that anyone would be familiar, especially with a text parser game. Because that's a whole other thing.
There's also a sense when I release these games now, it's like you just sort of have to accept, like, okay, like I'm just gonna have to expect you to understand how this game works, because it's like there's just some it's like if you don't like adventure games, you're probably not gonna like my game anyway. So why am I gonna be like, if I spend a lot of time tutorializing how this works, where the people who really want to like my game are annoyed by it? So I don't know. Yeah,
it's a trade-off.
Well, in our case, we started out when there were no conventions for adventure games. Other than the click to move, which was just, that was the only convention that we really had coming into the game, and the text parser where everything had to be typed. But then when it started to get into the more point and click world, it was basically a language that had to be created to interact with the world. And it worked because we were, Sierra was the only people, and LucasArts were doing the same kind of thing. And so we came up with a language that was a convention that worked. Yeah. And the truth is, we kind of evolved beyond those early days. And so we have to keep up with what's going on in other kind of games too, to see what players are used to playing and what they think should be universal.
Yeah, Laurie came into the industry never having played any of these adventure games. Was basically, we played tabletop D&D, and we're storytellers, and they said, okay, go direct the game.
Yeah,
and it's something that I've been thinking about, like, not just with the adventure game genre, but just with, like, how much industry has grown over the last 20 years in terms of having somebody brand new. And, like, is there room for these markets to expand like that? Because, as Corey and Laura were saying, like, with something like with Hero U and being so much inspired by Quest for Glory, that a new fan or a new player doesn't have that background. They have no idea what that franchise is. And for some people, when they hear the term adventure game, the first thing that comes to their mind would be, The Walking Dead. Like, that was kind of like the very first, like, pop culture, adventure game, like, that we saw. And it's very tricky, I think, to try and balance that out in terms of finding an audience or trying to figure out what is going to bring somebody new to these games, considering just how much, globalized the industry has gotten.
I mean, I never think of it that way, because it's like, if we weren't getting new players and new audiences and people weren't finding our way to these games, like, I've been doing this for 14 years. I sustained my family on it. And if, like, people weren't playing them, if, like, it wasn't growing, I wouldn't still be doing it. So I don't know how to answer. I hear that question a lot. How can we get new people? It's like, well, keep making games. Just keep making games. Like, people will find their way to it. And, like, why you think, why are people into roguelikes? That genre is deader than adventure games, really. And they're so hard to play, and they're viciously hard. But people find their way to them now, and they still love them, and they still play them. Same thing with adventure games. It's just, like, by most metrics, many other genres have, like, died and come back. But for some reason, this whole narrative of like, people love talking about adventure games in this way. They're died, now they've come back. Oh, this company's going to bring them back. Oh, they're dead again. And it's like no one ever says this about any other genre, and it drives me nuts. And no one loves that narrative more than adventure game players and developers themselves. We love saying this because it makes us sound like scrappy underdogs. When we're, I think we talked about this at the PAX panel. Like, yeah, we're all posers. Like, none of that's true. So when it's more like, how do you bring a new audience? Like, I don't know. There are more people playing games than ever now.
Yeah, the answer is you get lucky. It's really the same question as how do you become as rich as Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett? And the answer is that there is this bell curve, and most of us are somewhere in the middle of the bell curve, and that there are always outliers, and that those people, it is not that they are especially brilliant or especially did the right things. Other than the fact that they and hundreds or thousands of other people also did pretty close to exactly the right things, and that they got the lucky lottery ticket. So if you do the right things and things work out for you, then you go viral and then you succeed.
There's a very interesting. I feel like I'm monopolizing this. Phil, tell me to shut up if I'm talking. But I was having a talk with a developer not too long ago where they were like, "Yeah, everything is based on luck. Why bother making a good game?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's if you're lucky and like the right person plays your game and it goes viral or whatever, yeah, you're lucky. But if the game is bad and if you phoned it in." Like getting that luck is going to mean nothing.
Exactly. Well, you won't get that luck. You won't get that luck. Yeah. So.
But a good game is still a good game 5 or 10 years from now. It could pick up. So it's like you might as well put in the effort and make a good one, than just phone it in and hope you get lucky. It's still important to like make something worth playing.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend recently who he told me something that really stuck with me, which was, there's always going to be an infinite number of people who have never heard of your game. And that's the trick, is getting people to hear about your game. And yeah, the long tail of adventure games is a very real thing. Like, I'm not going to get into details with numbers, but like, we had a perfect storm of luck the other week where Lamplight City was in a bundle with 2 other detective games. It was also on sale. And that bundle got featured on Steam as the daily deal. And we had their second best month in the history of the game being out in the last, year and or 2 years almost. So yeah, it's like you never know when it's going to strike, and then that kind of just opens it up a little bit more for more people are playing it now. So hopefully it feeds into the algorithm, all that stuff. So yeah, I don't know how to figure it out, but there is a lot.
You open yourself to opportunities, like by agreeing to be in that bundle and so on, and putting yourself on sale periodically on Steam and GOG and so on. So you can improve the odds in your favor, but in the long run, it really comes down to a combination of quality and hitting the right spot at the right time. I saw a GDC talk from a guy who was on his 17th game on Steam, and his first 13 all lost money. But he stuck with it and kept going, and his 14th suddenly was a hit. And based on that hit, he funded the rest of it.
Jake Burkett.
Yeah. What was that game? I know who you're talking about.
Grey Alien Games.
Yep.
Oh, Grey
guy, right?
His big thing is none of his games are hits.
I don't know, his last 3 kind of up in.
Was that the no-hit wonder talk?
Could be.
Yeah, I think so. Something like that.
A few GDCs ago, where he was talking about how his game, like he released a lot of games on Steam, none of them did well, and his last game got like almost no reviews, no Metacritic score, but it's like this huge seller. Is basically like a license to print money, and it's just because it's something he keeps adding to. So he like. And I sort of was a little bit annoyed by that because he talked like he cracked some kind of magic formula, and this is the kind of game you should make. Which I don't know.
No, I didn't get that impression. I got the impression of stay with it, and sooner or later you may hit the right one,
or you might not.
You may not.
Yeah.
Just competition is supposed to be bad, but in a genre like this, it's great. It's what keeps people playing games. If there's no adventure games out there, nobody's looking for adventure games. They'll never find adventure games because they don't look anymore. But since there are so many people making different kinds of adventure games, different styles, we're attracting a broader audience and keeping people looking for our games.
And we should all talk about each other's games, because there's no such thing as a sale of Hero U costing Dave a sale of Unavowed or vice versa. It's people that play one, they'll get through it and they'll want to play another game. So talk about each. We post about Dave's games occasionally, but Julia's, and we're not real good at it, but get more people to try these games, and some people will find they really like them and want more.
Yeah, so it's different than the old school of everybody's a competitor, and don't talk to LucasArts because they might learn something from our code.
Not that we ever heard that from the president and founder of Sierra or anyone.
I think the thing with adventure games is a lot of the time the really big sellers generally have somewhat innovated in some way to the point where they don't get called adventure games anymore. Like, you look at games like Night in the Woods, Firewatch, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. They're all adventure games. They have puzzles, story driven. Yeah, and they don't have the precursor of saying an old school adventure game. And these are games that made insane amounts of money, and they're called narrative games now, or they're called walking simulators, or some other silly name for them. But people forget about them, and they're adventure games. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people said adventure games were dead, because all the ones that were making loads of money had somehow adopted a different name, and they're still adventure games. I think we just need to be aware of who's playing the games these days, and sort of be aware of the market, and make interfaces easier and stuff.
But I never liked the term, because what is an adventure? I think of adventure. I think of like Uncharted, like you're going on an adventure. I think what makes an adventure game an adventure game. Like, this is specifically like a narrative based game. It's narrative heavy. That's really all it is.
Steam had an online festival called Ludo Nericon a couple of weekends ago, and they had live streams of a bunch of games that were on sale. And I had Lamplight City gameplay streaming, or the gameplay of Lamplight City streaming, and I would pop in occasionally to the chat to see what people were saying. And one person said, "This isn't a narrative game; it's a gosh darn point and click." And I was like, "What?"
I guess that means the player has some agency.
My games are too much like walking simulators now, and I'm like, I don't quite know how I feel about that. I'm like, walking simulators are very popular. Shut up.
Well, we took walking out of Summer Days at Hero U. There's no longer any walking in the game, but all the rest of it's the same as an adventure game. And we lost players by the droves who said, that doesn't look like a Sierra game anymore.
Who knows?
That's what happens.
As a quick time check, we are just about an hour and a half in. I know we're hitting 5 o'clock. Is everyone
I have a meeting in 2 minutes.
Okay. I was just saying, we do have some few more questions. Is it okay? I can certainly let Corey and Lori go early, but is everyone okay with maybe going another 10-15 minutes thereabout?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I've got my dog's been howling, but I've got to take him out at some point.
Okay.
So I could probably do another 10 minutes or so. It's fine.
Okay. There are a few questions in chat that I want to get to, and like I said, we're all still stuck inside, so we can certainly plan for another one down the line. Either mix up the guests or have the exact same panel back, whatever everybody wants.
Love to.
So this was a question Thorsten asked earlier. How do you develop and keep track of narrative choices? Do you prefer specific tools, or do you have your own tried and true approach?
Enums are wonderful. I discovered enums for Unavowed. They're so great for doing that kind of thing. That's how I did it. Like, some people use tools. They have they use something called Artisy Draft to keep track of that stuff. I just use a notebook, or just I don't know. I somehow managed to keep it all straight in my head.
Yeah, I just do it in Engine too.
Yeah.
Or write it down or something.
Yep,
Yeah, I don't have
most
anything
of mine.
special.
Yeah, same.
Also keep the choices manageable. Usually the
Put it in the game.
choices that were in Unavowed were like limited to the bit of game that you were currently in. And occasionally they'd refer to it later. So they weren't like branches upon branches. It's like you did this one thing and then a character might refer to it later, do a variable check, and then they'll say the thing. That's really, so it wasn't that hard to keep track of.
Okay. Anything different from Francisco or Julia?
No, not
Nope.
really. I was. Francisco mentioned even he used to write his dialogue even in Engine, although he changed that recently. I know, but I'm writing the dialogue in Engine, and keeping track of story stuff is I was just using. Actually, was using bizarrely. I was using Adobe Illustrator for some reason because I could move stuff around. Like I could move blocks of text around easily and kind of make things connect to other things. That's not what it's made for, but that's kind of what I did my preliminary stuff in. And now it's just like point by point for each act because my game is separated into different chapters. And so I just said, well, it's happening in this chapter, and then I got to establish this over here and then put it over here. And it's not ideal, but it's working. So
I think if Ink could hook into AGS, I would switch to Ink because Ink is amazing. But Ink, like what John Ingold and all their games use.
Oh, I see.
It's really great. Richard is using it for Nighthawks, and it's so intuitive. It's so wonderful. But you can't hook it into AGS. You can hook it into Unity, but not AGS.
Everyone's AGS here right now?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Not
no.
anymore.
Oh, traitor!
I gave up on it too for a while, but I came crawling back.
I've gone to the dark side now, but
Oh, I see.
Not really. No, you're smart. I wish I could have stuck with Unity. It was just a little too much for my brain, and too much for Ben as well. He started to hate it, and I started to hate it. I just, I wouldn't change anything, but it would still give me 100 errors, and then I would compile it again without doing anything, and it would magically work. Drove me absolutely up the wall.
I think we lost Corey and Lori.
Yeah,
they waved.
I had to
They
go.
waved goodbye.
They waved goodbye.
Okay. Let me pop that out there. But let me see. There's a few more comments. I know this was something Ken asked at some point. Again, chat's been moving faster. I can keep track of some of these questions. I think he was asking about the use of voice acting, whether to have it, or what game should have it or not. Let me see if I can pull up, if I can find his exact question here. So many people have been chatting. Thank you, everybody, for coming on as well.
Talking to us or the chat?
To everybody. Everybody involved.
Glad to be here.
Yes.
Let's see. Here it is. How do you feel about voice work in your adventure games? And he said, I always gravitate to voice work games when it comes to the specific genre.
I love it. When I first started moving from freeware to commercial, last week or 14 years ago, it was I was making a commercial version of a freeware game I did, and I'm like, well, what can I do to make this game worth money now? And the first thing I thought of was I'll add voice acting, and I found it so satisfying working with the voice actors and so much fun, and it really made the game so much better. I think, especially for dramatic games, it adds. It can add a lot. It can really elevate a game or anything. Comedy games maybe less so, because I think like if you're doing a comedy voice for several hours, it'll start to get annoying. But for a more like dramatic story, it can really elevate the material, especially if you have really good actors who like can really get into their characters and kind of make it their own and kind of give it a life beyond what you conceived. I live for those moments. Like working with the voice actors is kind of my reward for getting the game to that point. And kind of my one annoyance for taking so long with my current project is that I can't work with the voice actors because I'm taking too damn long. And it kills me because I love working with voice actors. So I'm a little biased because I enjoy it so much. But I think good voice acting can really elevate a project. Bad acting can lower it. But not all games need voice acting. I personally like it myself. I know Julia has some opinions on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Crimson Diamond is sort of like an EGA look. The game looks like a game from like a certain era where there wasn't actually voice acting in it. My musician Dan Pollakart is using a real Roland MT32 for the music.
Amazing.
I know. It was his idea, so yeah, and I'm happy.
I love it.
Yeah, so it's awesome because we're recreating the look and the sound.
Music and drop in DOSBox.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. We have a few music streams up, and he shows what he runs DOSBox. He runs Windows 3.11. He's got this library and stuff. Yeah, it's insane what he does. He's a wizard. So yeah, we're kind of really going for the look and the feel of that. I mean, with game design improvements that we've had in the intervening 30 years. But yeah, I mean, so we're sticking to that sound. We're sticking to the look. So voice acting really wouldn't work for this game. For budgetary reasons, it's also like it's my first game, so there's nothing I'm working off savings, and so there's not really a lot of budget for that in the first place. And I feel like I can't really bring this up with the people that are here because of who you guys are and what you've done, but I'd like to say other jobs.
I'm sorry, Julia. My sound cut out just as you were about to say that. I'm terribly sorry. Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, so all the people, like all the present developers here, I have a feeling like this won't hold any water with you guys because you guys do the voice acting probably with just one person or a very small team. But voice acting is not just getting the voice acting, it's like the casting, it's the direction, it's recording, it's lip sync, it's implementation into the game. Like these are like half a dozen other jobs in the game, aside from the other jobs we do, everything else. So to me, I'm like, I can't even think about having doubling the amount of jobs I'm already doing. But I know you guys do it, so I have no excuse.
Well, yeah, I mean,
your excuse is that you're very smart.
That was what you just said was the reason that Lamplight City took 3 extra months of development, because I thought the editing and the lip sync was only going to take me a month and a half, and it took me 3 months, and it burned me out. But no, I feel the same. I love voice acting. I was thinking about this, and I think if I can toot my own horn a little bit, that I was one of the first, if not the first, AGS games to ever have voice acting ever. Back in 2002, I made a reality on the Norm game called Hooky McPegleg Pirate Postman, and I sourced people from the community, and I played Hooky McPegleg, and we had voice acting.
Didn't Grandy Zombie Killer come before that or after?
It was. I don't remember when I released it. No, it was after that because I only ever released a demo that also had voice acting. A bunch of my freeware AGS games had voice acting, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I've always enjoyed it too, and I also feel like it's a reward, and I also kind of have these rose-colored glasses of like, oh, it's gonna be so fun, and then it's fun, and we do it, and we record, and then it's like, I have to edit it all. But whatever, fine.
That's why I love doing the voiceover work for Clifftop Games. I did the voiceover casting and directing for Kathy Rain and Whispers of a Machine, and I got to do all the directing and work with the actors, and half of them are my friends now. I just adore voice actors, and I didn't have to do the editing afterwards, so that was great. I didn't have to do the editing for Shardlight either. That was wonderful.
But we got that done in 2 weeks.
We got the recording done in 2 weeks.
No, we got the editing done because you would send me the raw files. right after you finished them as you were going to the next session. I'd edit them at the end of the day, and then we'd cut them up. We had all that game VO in 2 weeks. That was an efficient project. Man. But the thing with voice acting that irritates me a little bit, it's my pet peeve. I guess I'm in the minority here. I'm a weirdo who, if a game has voice acting, I hate having the subtitles on because I'll get distracted and I'll read them. And it frustrates me to no end when people play games with the subtitles on that have voice acting and they click through it. And it's like, yeah, I get sometimes the text is a little long and they finish reading it, so you should like truncate your text and stuff. But it's like, we put so much effort and the performances are so good, please don't click through them.
That's why I make each line really small.
Yeah.
Each line is really short for that reason.
That's what I've started doing too. Anyway.
Any thoughts?
I can talk about voice acting forever. Like that's the.
I don't ever want to do voice acting again.
Oh yeah, how many voices did you do for guard duty?
About 16 characters.
Wow.
Because I had no money and I had a microphone. Why not? So I how many? I did 16 characters myself, but we had about a total of 7 voice actors, I think, 7 or 8.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of dialogue as well. It was silly. I promised on Kickstarter that we would have voices in the game, and that was when the game was like in its early stages, and then it got to the end. It's like I have to put voices in there.
The voice acting in that game was pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot.
It was all right. Yeah, I'm surprised that it went down as well as it did, to be honest. I didn't spent a lot of time sort of cleaning up audio files and stuff, like noise gating audio and noise reducing stuff, but it went down pretty well, and console players seem to be enjoying the voice acting as well, which is a surprise. But yeah, never again. I mean, my next game will have some voice acting, but there's minimal dialogue in this project, so.
Let me see. I think we have a few more questions. I have one final question to end the cast on. So, for chat, if I'm missing any questions, please let me know. I'm trying to scan it as I'm listening to the conversation. Let's see. I think we got all the major ones. For the questions about what everybody is working on next, that will be kind of saved for like the kind of like round the table ending for everybody. I think I got all the general ones. But again, for the chat, if I'm missing anything, please let me know. But here's my final question for the table, and then we will, if there's no other questions from chat, we will wind things down there. This was something somebody brought up earlier about kind of the blurring of the lines of like adventure games and genres and stuff like that. And I'm trying to scan it for the exact comment, but they were talking about how much the game Disco Elysium made them think about kind of that blurring of an RPG and adventure in terms of how they present their mechanics. And I wanted to ask everybody on here about this idea of, I guess, that kind of blurring of these kinds of genre definitions. Earlier in the roundtable, Corey mentioned, of course, that an adventure game is, it's narrative, it's puzzle, it's dialogue. But are there any thoughts about kind of trying to do like unique things? Like, again, like one of the big things was in Disco Elysium was this idea of, combat being entirely, narrative driven or being, character driven, and there is no input by the player, but they can still represent combat and represent these various aspects in the game.
Yeah, it worked great. I had a lot of fun with it. I mean, there's really, when it works, and in that game it really works. I felt like, it feels like an RPG because I'm constantly looking at my stats and trying to figure out what half the stats are, because the game does not really tell you. It's like esprit de corps, like what is that? Like, and eventually you figure it out as you put points into it. I found that very interesting. But yeah, it worked. It worked really well. Also they had a ton of writers on that game. Because there's just so much. There's so much in that game. It's wonderful.
I think it goes back to what I think Laurie said before about how if you try and innovate, it no longer is classified as an adventure game. Because I feel like there's a lot of other genres as far as the blurring, where a lot of adventure game elements are put into other genres. But as soon as you put any element from another genre into an adventure game, it's not like people have a very rigid view of what a traditional adventure game is.
But also,
what start blurring the lines,
feels like an old school isometric RPG. It's got the
it feels like Planescape. I just started playing and I'm like, oh, this is like Planescape Torment, but without combat. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because we released a trailer for Nighthawks last week, and a lot of the folks were like, "This doesn't look like an adventure game." Like, well, it's not. it's more of a visual novel RPG than adventure game. That's what it is. We can do other things.
Yeah, but the question is, are people receptive to other things once they're used to a certain thing? That's like one of the things with, I mean, this is not to you personally, I just mean in general, like the adventure game fans, like, because are the hardcore adventure game fans willing to have a little bit of something else in their adventure game? Are the hardcore adventure game fans willing to have an adventure game that plays like another type of thing?
The sad thing is, and this might make me lose some fans, if you're marketing purely to the hardcore old school adventure game fans, like that is not going to expand your audience. Like that market is really small. Like the real hardcore adventure game people who like love the way they were in 1992 and don't want any changes. Like that is a very limited audience.
Yeah.
And it's good to, you know, it's good to make a game that they'll like, but you can't be so rigid about what the game is. Every game is different. So, you know,
I think this goes back to Julia's example from earlier about like the walk site or the wall controls in the Crimson Diamond, and how there's always that balance between I'm going to make this traditional adventure game, you know, I'm going to harken back to, you know, the classic era, but there's also that fact that many people who are playing games these days didn't grow up with that. And I've had conversations with RPG developers who are working on like modern retro takes on that, and the idea of if I make this so, you know, traditional, if I make it so rigid back in that day, I'm gonna have people who are gonna love that, but I'm also have a lot of people who have no idea what the hell I'm looking at, and they're just gonna immediately get turned off by it.
Yeah, it's there's a few things I've changed because I wanted to play with as many different kinds of people as possible. I mean, there's a graphical inventory in Crimson Diamond that looks like a VGA game graphical inventory, and that's because there's no reason to have it just be a list of stuff. It actually it's better for the player. It's easier for the player to play and use a graphical inventory than just when you type inventory, you get this shopping list of all your belongings, and it doesn't really do much for the player. I never want to think that I'm just marketing my game to people that are only interested in classic games. And even though I want it to look and sound like that, I don't want it necessarily to be just for those people, and that's why I've got the tutorial room and stuff like that. I think that nowadays when we have these game development tools like Twine and Adventure On that are trying to make it easier for anybody to make a game, and those ones are particularly they're text parser based. I think it gives people more comfort maybe with playing that type of game. Like there's a ton of Adventure On games on itch.io that are text parser, and a lot of game design courses they teach with those because they're so easy and they're so accessible. And I'd like to think that text parser games are not just limited to people who fondly remember them. We'll see about that, but I think
up on Infocom myself.
Yeah, I think the interface is something that can come back, and texting it and typing people are doing all the time anyway. So I'm hoping that there's something there.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts from you, Nathan?
I think they've covered it.
I guess the real question is when will we get the Dark Souls of adventure games?
Dark Souls of adventure games.
Or from chat, maybe the Dark Souls roguelike of adventure games. We'll just hit it all right there.
I have no idea what that would even play like.
I want to
It's
play
called
it.
Dark Seed. It already exists.
Okay, fair enough. The one that kills you constantly and doesn't tell you how to play it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think with that, again, like we could sit here and chat for, another 2-3 hours, but I do know everybody does have to get back to work at some point. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to kind of go around and kind of talk about what you're currently working on, what are your plans, anything along those lines. So we'll once again go in alphabetical order. So Dave, Francisco, Julia, and Nathan. So go right ahead.
All right. Well, we're publishing a game called Nighthawks, which is best described as a Sunless Sea / Vampire Bloodlines mashup. It's being written by Richard Cobbett, who's a very prolific games reviewer from Rock Paper Shotgun and PC Gamer and GameSpy and all sorts of places. Ben Chandler is doing the art for it. I have the difficult task of tweeting about it when they do something. And I'm working on something else that I prefer. Is a time travel game I mentioned earlier. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to take the spotlight away from Nighthawks while that's still in the works. So I'm working on two things at the moment.
All right.
I'm working on a game called Rosewater. It is a point-and-click Western adventure in an alternate history. If you played Lamplight City, it's the same world as Lamplight City. If you didn't play Lamplight City, you can play Lamplight City. You can buy it in...
That wasn't
sorry.
a going about you. We've been talking for a while. I mean, yes, you're going, but go on.
It's a detective adventure in an alternate 19th century, which you can get on Steam right now, or GOG. Yeah, so check those out. Follow me on Twitter, @Grundislav Games.
Nice. I'm Julia Minamata, and I'm making the Crimson Diamond, which is what you see back here, my nice banner that I had made. The Crimson Diamond is an EGA, so the 16-color palette from 1989, text parser mystery adventure game that's based in Canada in 1914. There is a demo available on Steam, on itch.io, and on my site for Windows PC and for Mac. And I just released, actually, this week I released a new version of the demo, which has Dave's feedback and Francisco's feedback. So it's
the new version. Sorry,
that's fine. I figured everyone who's already played, who's tested for the beta, they probably don't really need to see it, just to know that it's there. And there's nothing new on it, but the demo is great because like now it's the best possible version that it's been so far. So if you haven't had a chance to play the Crimson Diamond demo yet, this is the best time to do it. It's least buggy state, and so you can follow me on Twitter, Julia Minamata. If you just go to the crimsondiamond.com, you'll find all the links. I've been doing live streams showing the art process and the music process. I mentioned that Dan Polakar, my musician, is using the Roland MT32. So we have, I think, 2 or 3 streams that we've done with him just together, and he shows all the technical aspects of that because it's actually pretty cool. And what else? I think that's pretty much it. Just all the stuff is there. I have a Crimson Diamond Gazette that comes out every month, and you can sign up for that on the website too.
I'm currently, I've obviously just released Guard Duty on consoles. Currently working on a first-person narrative horror game about exploration and listening to your environment. It's kind of Firewatch by way of Silent Hill. We don't have a name for it yet. Or I don't have a name for it yet, should I say. But I've just finished the cut of the trailer, so I need to hurry up and think of a name, and then we're going to announce it. I say we, it's me and the publisher, but I'm going to announce it next week, hopefully, towards the end of next week. So check sickchicken.com, and you'll have all the news on there. Really excited to show it to people.
Sounds interesting. Anytime someone says Silent Hill, it gets me very excited.
It's one of my all-time favorites. So.
Mm-hmm. And because Corey and Lori left early, they're of course they released the game Hero U Rogue to Redemption, which is kind of a spiritual sequel to the Quest for Glory series. You can find that on Steam. There is a demo for it, and their main site, of course, is Transsolar Games. And for anybody watching this recorded, there will be links updated down below for everybody's social media, where their games are, all that lovely administrative stuff. But I think, again, unless we want to spend another 2 hours talking, I think we can wrap things up here. But everybody, it was a pleasure hanging out with you this afternoon/evening. And yeah, like I said, if you're free in the future, if we're still all stuck inside, we can certainly set up for another one of these. So I'm sure we'll have even more questions then.
Cool. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right. So, everybody, that is going to do it. So, again, I would like to thank our panel and for the audience watching us live or recorded. If you are a developer working on a game, like to come on for one of these casts, please get in touch. And I am looking for more developers for other specific themed casts or genre-themed casts. So, if you'd like to participate in that in the future, please get in touch with me because we're always looking for more guests. As always, check out our Discord and Patreon link down below and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Have a great evening, everybody, and we will see you all next time. Take care.
Bye.